Kelly Kennedy, a very experienced and talented journalist. She's working now as a health policy reporter at USA Today. She's been there since 2010. Previous to that, she wrote a book called They Fought for Each Other, based on a series that she wrote for Military Times. Kelly was actually an embedded reporter at one time, and before that, she was a soldier. And this is, I'm not going exactly chronologically here, but Kelly did serve in the U.S. Army from 87 to 93. She became a journalist, has a master's in journalism, she's taught journalism, she's covered defense and military issues, and, as I said, now is covering health policy. So we are really pleased that she was able to make it here to be with us today, and she's going to talk to you about, again, we're going to now drill down a little bit, get a little bit more specific about ways to follow federal money, and I think Kelly's going to put you guys to work. So, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you. Is there anything else you need from us?
Yes, it did. Well, while we're doing this, how many people are regional reporters who cover everything? Okay, anyone specifically defense? Anyone specifically healthcare? You are? Your defense?
Yeah,
And healthcare? Okay.
business.
Business. Okay. Is anyone specifically healthcare? Okay, so those of you who didn't raise your hands, what are you covering?
Campaigns.
Energy.
I'm sorry?
Energy.
Energy? Yeah, I'm not going to be able to help you at all. Actually, I think I will be able to, so.
All right.
Still trying to figure out how to turn this off. Okay. So what I'd like to do today, I've sat in on a lot of these. I was a fellow myself. And usually by lunchtime, you're just hungry and you sometimes don't care as much as you should. And it's difficult to sit through one of these things where you're just kind of watching someone click through and talk about a page. So what I'd like for you to do is a lot of your own clicking through, and instead of giving you actual links, I'm going to tell you phrases to look up because I think that's kind of easier to remember. The other thing I find about these is I tend to write down so many ideas that I'm going to go back through and I swear I'm going to type out my notes and then I just never get the chance to. So by the end of today, what I'd like for you guys to have is a story idea and 3 sources written down and be ready to go as soon as you walk out the door to have a story written. That way your bosses will love you. And that's always
And
good.
they'll love me, so that's even
Exactly.
better.
So, yeah, I used to be president of military reporters and editors, and it seemed like our best sessions were the ones where everyone came out with actual story ideas instead of just a bunch of pages of stuff to look at. So that's why everyone's got a phone or a computer to sort of group around. We're still up there. Okay. So you're going to see my crazy notes. And now you know my email address. So what I'd like for you to do first is type in usaspending.gov. And this one will apply to everyone. This is the whole how do you track government spending. Okay, so everyone who's got a computer, I would like for you to type in Affordable Care Act in quotation marks. Okay, so you immediately get every single government contract that's being used for the Affordable Care Act. And you can do this with anything. You can do this with defense. You can do it with your state. You can do it with a base within your state. So if you hit Fort Bragg, it'll pull up everything. You can put in a person's name. You can put in a contractor's name if you wanted to put in someone you've been looking at. So what I'd like for you to do right now is spend 5 minutes just digging through on your own and writing down some notes about story ideas. It really is going to be a working session. So I'm going to hand you, is your phone going to work for this, or does someone need to use this computer for a second? And you guys are seeing on this side, it'll help you narrow it down a little bit more if you want to do by agency or a certain department or so.
It's just I'm not really sure what I'm looking at this particular one. Like, there's so much information.
Yeah, well, if you're
like information overload.
If you're like covering a certain state and you type in Affordable Care Act plus your state, it can kind of narrow it down. And okay, I'm going to stop you guys now. It looks like you're pretty well into it, so that's good. Anyone find anything interesting already, or are you just kind of going, what the hell is this, and there's a lot to it?
I have a question. I'm wondering what it is, but also we went down to the bottom to see what the lowest grant numbers were.
Mhm.
And in one case, it's negative 40 million. And what might that situation be? Seems like a bummer of a grant. I was thinking, what it might
Detroit?
grant. Sorry?
Detroit?
No, it's Minnesota.
I was kidding. I actually have no idea.
Well, it's that one is, oh, sorry, here.
It's free form, but we still need you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Minnesota is negative $40 million, and then the next lowest is negative $11 million. But there's like a couple people who have negative millions of dollars in a grant. So I think we're wondering, what does that mean?
You would have to call and ask them because I have no idea. Is that under the Affordable Care Act?
Yes.
Oh. You know, some of the grants aren't going through because they've been sort of half-assedly defunded by Congress. So maybe that's a possibility. They're still waiting for it, or I'm not sure.
Gotcha. We'll narrow it down to only the ones that have been finished.
Question.
Well, I was just gonna say that some of those are take-backs. So you look at the contract number, the grant number, and then see there can be multiple entries for the same grant, and it's an adjustment or a modification or a second year where they were budgeted maybe a certain amount, and then that negative 40 million is they're deleting that off of that, maybe a multi-year grant or contract or something like that.
Thanks, that's a big
Good thing he's here. Okay, what else did you guys find? Was that just not enough time? Yeah.
Department of Defense buys a lot of fuel from Exxon. It's
Weird.
not really surprising.
Okay. What is your beat?
I cover transportation of
Yes.
particularly crude oil.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you're a regional reporter, this is a pretty rich site to be able to find anything. You can type in a big business in your area. You can type in like the Navigator grants will come up here. Does everyone know what the Navigator grants are? So the Affordable Care Act, they're giving people in the states money to help people sign up for the Affordable Care Act or for the exchanges that launch next month. And it's a lot of money. It's interesting right now because the states that aren't expanding Medicaid aren't doing state exchanges, aren't getting that as much of that money, and they're probably the ones who need it more because they're not paying to promote it themselves. Like Oklahoma doesn't even mention on their websites that there is such a thing as an exchange. Last month I was talking to my sister in Indiana, and she said our governor isn't doing exchanges, so we don't have the Affordable Care Act. So, my sister obviously doesn't read the newspaper. So there's some really interesting things going on in the states that way. Texas is especially interesting because the federal government has 3 states they're kind of honing in on where they want young, mostly Hispanic people to sign up, and that's Florida, California, and Texas. Well, only California has a state exchange, so Florida and Texas are going to get a lot of federal attention. So if you're in those states, those are really good stories. Okay. So next what I want you to do is Google, and like I said, I'm not going to have you type in a whole bunch of site names because that's kind of a pain in the butt. But I want you to go in and Google Defense Actuary. And the top thing that comes up should be Department of Defense Actuary. So click on that. Actually, that's not it.
Office of the Actuary?
Yeah, it's the Office of the Actuary. End up in Bing. Okay, and this should be interesting. Yeah, Office of the Actuary Home. This should be interesting to everyone who does anything statewide or defense or healthcare. So on the side, it should say evaluation report, statistical report. And what I'd like for you to look at is the statistical report. Is everyone seeing that?
No.
Those
Other
are
points and
points of
context.
contact.
Wait, did I do that wrong?
Oh,
Or you can go under military retirement.
okay, I'm sorry, go up to the top. And where it says military but retirement at the top, hit statistical reports. Is everyone seeing that?
That's the
Okay.
one? Oh.
Go ahead and do 2012.
Oh, right here?
We can do it on, is there an easy way to turn this on?
To turn the screen back on?
Yeah.
I don't know what he did to turn it off.
Okay.
Yeah, this one, right?
Okay. So what you should, does everyone have the statistical report on the military retirement system open?
Yep.
Okay. So for me, this report was super interesting in 2006 because I was working on my master's thesis, which happened to be Walter Reed. And what I was able to find with this report was how many people retired with a disability and what their ratings were. So a military disability, if you lose a leg, that's a 100% rating. You get 100% of your pay, base pay, as when you leave the military. And basically, what it is, the military disability system, retirement system, is you leave the military because you can no longer do your job in the military, but they reimburse you for whatever you've lost because of your military service. But what we found with the actuary reports in 2007, when the wars were going pretty strong, was that if you were an Air Force officer, you got a much higher disability rating than you did if you were a Marine Corps grunt who'd served in Iraq. And it was across the board. It was ugly. These officers were coming out who'd never gone overseas. They'd had like a back injury, and they're coming back with these really high ratings, and the grunts weren't. And this report allowed us to show that, and it's great if you're a state reporter too, because it gives you the number of retirees in your state. So go to page 26. Everybody got that? So this tells you how much is paid out in your state in thousands of dollars. It tells you how much the money is. It tells you how many people there are. So if you live in Florida, you've got 188,000 retirees who are receiving, this is just regular retirement pay from the military. This could be important with the Affordable Care Act as well, because these guys, a lot of them are getting their care through VA, and their kids, they're probably not going on the exchanges. Does everyone know what the exchanges are? Anyone who doesn't? Anyone who doesn't want to admit they don't know what they are? Okay, so to get care or to get insurance through the exchange, you go in through with your tax forms. That's how they determine how much your subsidy is going to be, if you're going to get a subsidy. Well, if you're a military retiree, you get your health care through the military, so you don't need it. But if you've got a kid who's not eligible for that VA health care, they may still be eligible for the exchanges. And the way they would get that is through the dad or the mom's tax forms. So the parent would still have to go through the exchange even though they're not going to qualify. So that's kind of a big deal if you're writing about family issues. The other thing is that, just as a side, kids on foster care, because they can't stay on their parents' insurance because they're basically, anyway, they age out of the system at age 18. So the Affordable Care Act is actually set up so those kids can keep getting insurance until they're 26. So that's kind of a big deal. You might be able to figure out how many foster kids are in your state and find out if that's, the issue there is that there's not really anyone to tell them that they're eligible for it. So just a side story for your state. It also lists how many veterans are living in foreign countries, and there's 8,000 living in Germany and 1 living in Antarctica. I didn't see any in Syria. There is 1 in Somalia, and you might even be able to figure out which one he is because he was one of the rebels. And there are 25 in Afghanistan, veterans living in Afghanistan. So, I mean, for me, I just kind of wonder who they are. Are they Afghan? Are they, who are these people? And you might be able to dig around and find out. You might be able to do a Google search and say veteran in Afghanistan, living in Afghanistan, I guess would work better, and see who these people are. So you can break the numbers down by zip code too in that report. So if you live in Florida, you might be able to figure out where, if there's a particular area where all of the veterans live, like maybe Tampa. Colorado Springs is a big veterans area that can apply to benefits there. And one of the big stories lately has been that if you are a veteran living in sort of a rural area, it's really hard to get your benefits, which can lead to another story idea, which is that VA pays for your gas mileage. So if you're living 200 miles away and you have to go to the doctor once a week, that's a lot of gas mileage VA is paying out, and it's a lot of paperwork, which is interesting when there's a 400,000 case backlog right now for the VA. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes to play around in that report and see if there's anything that piques your interest. And I know it's defense, but there's health stuff in here and there's business stuff in there, so just kind of dig through and see what you see. So what other story ideas did you guys come up with out of this? Did anyone else have anything? Yeah, what'd you get?
We were just, we were kind of, we were kind of stuck on this lonely guy in Afghanistan. Just like, first of all, we weren't really clear on what it meant by paid by DoD and monthly payment, and the fact that he gets I don't know, maybe it could be a she, who knows, but $6,000 a month.
It could be an officer.
It could be an officer, but but like places like Cameroon, the person gets $3,000 a month. There's a lone person in Cameroon. And just wondering, is it based on like the standard of living of that country and why?
No.
Like, what is that number based on in terms of?
So I retired, when I got out of the military, I was a Spec 4, which is pay rank of E4, which is one above a private. Obviously, I didn't retire, but that compared to like a lieutenant colonel is significantly different. So as a private, I was making like $1,000 a month, and lieutenant colonels are going to be making significantly more. So, and I think it actually says what the rates are.
Okay.
So and it'll change. For the cost of living, they get something called COLA. So it's based on where you live, and I'm not sure if that applies to retirees or not. But
so it's all just kind of lumped in together because like we were looking at Canada, and it looked like the people there get like $1,800 a month.
It's an average.
If it's divided equally, so
right?
Maybe it's not divided equally within that amount. Okay.
Yeah, because there's a difference between enlisted and officer too. So
okay.
yeah, totally just an average. But if you've got one dude in Afghanistan, you sort of know what he's getting.
Yeah, and that's, he's living pretty large.
Yeah, he's buying a lot of shawls. Okay. Anybody else have anything?
I have a question. You mentioned before the situation where the parents might have benefits from the military, but the children would have to go through the exchange. Now, is that just if they're 18 and on? And then I'm wondering too, wouldn't they, if they're working in any way, file their own taxes and go through the exchange versus their parents?
Mm-hmm. So if you're military retired, like you did your 20 years, your family's set. If you get out on disability, the government pays for your health for the rest of your life as long as you've got that disability rating, but not your family. So that's is going to apply for those people. For 18, yeah, you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26 now. So it might be cheaper to go through your parents. If you're 18 and you're on your own, your exchange money is probably going to be better. Your subsidy is going to be better if you go on your own than if you go on dad's. So it totally depends on your situation. But yeah, so that's how that would apply. Anyone else? Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at the number of military personnel on active duty who were eligible to retire and the number who actually retired.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, comparing these numbers to other occupations in the economy. Are more people who are eligible to retire in the military staying on than other occupations who are eligible to retire? It's like education or
Yeah. Well, the military is different because, so I'm going to show you in a minute the injuries. If you're in the military and you've been jumping in and out of trucks with a bunch of gear on, you start breaking down. So a lot of guys retire at 20 because they're done. It's like playing football or something. You're done. And then if you get out, like I said, if I'd retired, I could have gotten out when I was 37. So, I mean, that's younger than I am now. I think I'm still going. So probably they're going to have a second career. But if you look at someone like Petraeus, he's obviously going to stay in longer. He's going to be asked to come back, and I mean, assuming he behaves himself. But if you're an officer and you're making good money, your retirement's going to continue to build just like it does in the civilian world. So I don't know if it'd be sort of an apples and apples comparison. It's just, I think the more interesting story there might be what kinds of jobs these guys are getting afterwards. So you've got this high unemployment rate for veterans. You guys know about that. It's higher than for everybody else. So, and the reason for that is if you're in the military and you're going around shooting things, it doesn't exactly compare to a civilian job, hopefully. So trying to build those skills up for a civilian job is different. So maybe if you're looking at the guys who are coming out just after serving 4 years and the kinds of jobs they're getting compared to the guys who come out after 20 years and the jobs they're getting. Because some of those guys are still, infantry for 20 years, but they're going to have different kinds of experiences. So that might be an interesting story. Anyone else? Yeah.
We were looking at the number of percentage retiring of officers, and it seems like the percentage keeps declining even more as we get into 2013. Is it because more are being forced to voluntarily and involuntarily separate?
Yeah. So there's a couple things going on there with the disability retirement. The Air Force especially is starting to push people out who weren't necessarily getting out before. So if you were working some kind of an office job because you've got a bum foot or something, the Air Force is now saying, if you can't run your PT test, you're out. Does everyone know what a PT test is? Your physical fitness training, yeah. So it's definitely, the guys are all freaking out about that right now, whether they're going to be able to stay in or not, because there's a drawdown. So when I joined in the 80s, there were no wars going on, which is part of the reason I joined in the 80s. Ended up in 2. So they weren't letting people in who had like tattoos. The tiniest thing they wouldn't let you enlist. And now like you can have tattoo here, and you can come in as someone who didn't graduate from high school. You can come in if you're overweight. They've got a program for overweight people to join the military now. So it changes, and that's all going to revert back to probably those 80s levels as they do the drawdown. So that's interesting. It's definitely an interesting story at the state level if you've got a base to see who's leaving and where they're going and what kinds of jobs they're going to have and how it's going to affect your local economy. Okay. Okay, so Google, fiscal year 2014 DoD budget release. Right there.
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's up there. It's fiscal year 2014 DoD budget release. Yeah, it gives you the number of, or the amount of money that's being spent on housing, military housing next year, and it's 0 and hasn't been anything for the last couple of years, which I think is interesting. It gives you all the, what's the acronym for the base closure?
Right.
That's it.
Right.
It gives you all of those figures and breaks it down pretty easily. So when you're in a tizzy and and have no idea where to get this data, this is where to go. So I'm gonna let you guys just look at that for a minute. And see if you can come up with some story ideas. There's health stories in here too. The thing that fascinates me about defense funding is that Congress members will toss something into the budget and it'll be like the best research funding for breast cancer is through the military. And it's just because some senator stuck it in there. So it can be a good place to go for health stories. Okay, so speaking of BRAC, if you go back to the main page and you go down here to the second to last one, you get, this is the table of contents. You get all sorts of stuff that's local to your community. So does anyone want to take a second to look at that? Or I guess while you're looking at military housing, a lot of military families were hit by the foreclosures. And it was a big problem because people in the military move every 3 years. So that's kind of an interesting story. And then there's also, like she was just mentioning a minute ago, housing in the military has been privatized. So the money's going out to private companies. It might be interesting to see if they all did okay through all of that, if they ended up losing money or if they did okay. So I just did a search for South Carolina just to see if I could find, the localized one. And I don't know what page. Oh, it's page 61. And it's interesting to me because these are the authorized amounts for the bases. And so you've got 18,000 in Rhode Island, and then you've got in Maryland a lot. Anyone have any thoughts on why Maryland has so much money coming in?
Naval Academy.
What's that?
Naval Academy.
That could be one reason.
Barbara Mikulski.
What else is in Maryland? Walter Reed. So the new hospital. Okay, what'd you guys find? Anything interesting? Okay, and the last thing for military I'd like for you to Google is AFHSC. Should I hit you with it again? AFHSC. This one's fabulous. This is the best thing I've ever found. Of course, I was a military health reporter, so that's why. Everyone got it? Okay. So if you click on that, these are the monthly medical reports that the military puts out. And they're fascinating because they give you everything from, like I was saying, back injuries to how many people at Fort Bragg have chlamydia. Yeah. It tells you the AIDS population. That's an interesting story in the military because it used to be that if you got AIDS in the military, you got booted out, and now you can stay. Although with the drawdowns, that could change. So that's kind of an important thing. For some reason, since the war started, a lot of things are really, really high up there, like post-traumatic stress disorder, and pregnancy complications, and back injuries, and lung injuries. So the guys are coming back with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease at age 22. And that's, the theory is the burn pits, they're burning 242 tons of trash in an open pit 1 mile from the troops, which, you're not allowed to burn trash in your backyard in the United States. And they were putting everything in there from computers to trucks to, just bad stuff. But then the sand there is also smaller in Afghanistan than it is anywhere else in the world, so it's getting down into their lungs. They think that might be a problem. The sand also carries bacteria, so they're getting sick from it. There's a lot of problems. So when, I think it was Harvard did that study saying this is going to cost us billions and billions of dollars, here it comes. So that's a big story. It could be a big story in your state. Colorado has a lot of interesting things going on with lung research with the troops, and so does Kentucky. So every month they have one of these reports. So if you go down to, where is it? Reports and publications. And you go to the medical surveillance monthly reports. You'll get every month, and every month will give you a synopsis of what they're looking at. One of the things they're really proud of is that they've done a pretty good job of getting rid of infections in hospitals, like the MRSA stuff. But if you go to, it's March or April, over the past 10 years, I've been taking these military reports that come out, and they give a breakdown. Let me see if I can find one. They give a breakdown of every single possible injury, disease, short-sightedness, dental problems that you could get in the military. I
have an injury question, just looking at this document. It says total injuries, unintentional and intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And then under intentional, the options are self-inflicted, violence, or war. And then under unintentional, it says guns, explosives, except for. So what would, I'm sorry. So what does war mean if it's an unintentional injury?
Well, so one of the stories I wrote really early in the war was the guys were accidentally shooting each other. Yeah. And it really was an accident. That's why when the guys go on bases now, they have to shoot into a barrel of sand because they weren't clearing their weapons and people were accidentally shooting each other.
So that would be an intentional war injury?
That's unintentional.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what is intentional war? Under intentional, it's self-inflicted violence or war.
Uh-huh.
So is intentional war?
I remember having to look this up before, and I don't remember what the answer is. Does anyone know what the answer is?
Would that be like Hassan?
Like a what?
Like Nidal Hassan?
Like someone shooting
Yeah.
intentionally? I'm not sure.
It would be enemy fire.
Oh, like intentional, someone intentionally shot you? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it seems like that would be it, but I had to look it up before, and I really don't remember. I didn't want to lead anyone astray on that one, so.
Otherwise, where would that fall in?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's probably the answer, but. Okay, so let me see if I can find it. I think it's April.
We've got just about 5 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
Good time to be
Let me give you some quick other sites then. So you've got that one, that's important. So I'm sorry, I thought this went till 1. Is it almost 1?
No, actually, 12 minutes.
Okay.
You can't see that side when you're standing in.
Okay, so for Affordable Care Act, the things that you're going to want are MedPAC, MED-PAC. That's where you'll get all of the Medicare and Medicaid numbers. And it's a huge report. It comes out to Congress every year. MedPAC every year gives Congress recommendations on what they should do to fix healthcare spending. The Affordable Care Act created IPAB. Has everyone heard of IPAB? This is the death panel that everyone's talking about. The difference between MedPAC and IPAB is that IPAB automatically comes into effect when healthcare spending hits a certain amount. And instead of Congress coming up with having to take the recommendations and do something with them, IPAB's recommendations go into play automatically unless Congress does something about them. So that's the only two differences between those. The only difference between those boards. MedPAC also every year says that we spend too much money on durable medical goods like wheelchairs. It's fraud. Home health care, more fraud, and hospital readmissions are mistakes. So those are good things to look at your local area if you're interested in health care. And you want to get on the health affairs list. And every year or every month they put out a report, and it seems like no matter what I'm writing about, if I open up the Health Affairs Journal, it'll have all this data about whatever that is. And it's a super nerdy crowd that shows up for their meetings once a year. But it's really good stuff. So, okay, that was it in 5 minutes. How's that?
Nice wrap-up job. Wow. Kelly, thank you so much. This was